today I thought we could explore something that's always a lot of fun to do, and that is trying to synthesize water. Obviously, the easiest way to make water sounds is to actually just go outside with a field recorder and record some water, right? It's always going to sound 100% realistic, but there's something special about when you actually sit down and try to make water from scratch. It has this like designed kind of quality to it that you only really get when you actually do this kind of thing. So it could be really useful for maybe video game sound effects like spell casting, or even just really cool effects for your music. Plus, hopefully you'll just learn a lot by trying to do this kind of thing. So first off, why don't we just actually load in a recording of water, have a look at it, have a listen, and like see if we can kind of see any patterns or maybe identify a starting point. So I've got my own little Foley pack that I've made here. This is, by the way, this is on my Patreon. So if you like the sound of it, definitely check it out. So if we go into the water folder here, I've got a bunch of water sounds. Now these like waterfall ones are basically just white noise, right? So it'll be a bit too easy. Let's try to find something that might be a bit more challenging. This might be a good one to have a look at. Let's have a listen. So there's definitely no, obviously there's no musical kind of tonality to this, or even rhythm really. It's kind of really random, right? We zoom in, you can kind of see it's mainly made up of sine waves, right? Maybe with a little bit of noise thrown in there. Look at this a little bit. That there looks like sine waves, but there's like lots of different pitches in there, so it's probably just going to come across as kind of noisy, I'm guessing. What's this little... Yeah, it's like that bright little spit before the little drop there. It's almost like a percussive hit. You can see like most of the really watery kind of sounds are basically just sine waves here. What if we look at this on a spectrogram as well? So we're basically seeing the sound on a 2D kind of plane at the moment, right? Left and right is time, up and down is frequency. So we have these little bursts of kind of noise here. But we do have little like discrete pitches too, which are basically just sine waves. There's no extra harmonics on top of those. Like that. So I guess we've figured out that sine waves might be a good starting point. We're going to have to introduce some kind of randomness to those sine waves, and maybe we could introduce some kind of noise into the process as well, and then hopefully we might end up with something kind of watery. So I'm just going to drag an operator. Since we only need sine waves, we don't need any like fancy synth, right? Anything that can produce a sine wave would probably work. So literally any synth in the history of mankind, probably. And for this first example, we're basically going to be heavily relying on effects and stuff, but there's definitely ways of getting watery kind of textures using only a synth, which I'll kind of touch on at the end of this video. But then also maybe in part 2 of this video, which I might upload in a few days, hopefully, we might explore some watery textures inside of Serum, or maybe even Vital or something like that. So I guess let's start off with just trying to make a kind of bloopy sine wave sound. So that's our sine wave. We go up a couple octaves there, make just like a short decay, and maybe we can mess with pitch envelope here. Yep. So we're just affecting the pitch of the sine wave really quickly as it's being played in this kind of shape. Yeah, it kind of sounds like a bloop, doesn't it? So we have a single sine wave thing happening here, but we kind of need to create some more, right? Make them sound random. And I've found the easiest way to do that is probably just with a delay. So like super simple delay. So now we're going to have the same thing repeated. But how do we get lots of different random pitches like we had in our example sound? Well, if you notice, if we turn the sync off here and we start moving the time value, we're going to start smoothly moving the the delay points like closer together or further apart. And the effect that has is basically if you've ever heard a car come towards you or go away from you, when it's coming towards you, it goes higher in pitch, right? Because all of the little waveforms are getting squashed. And when it goes away, it gets lower in pitch because the waveforms are getting longer, right? Same thing happens with our delay here. So bring the feedback up a little bit and then start. You're kind of starting to hear a little glimpse of random wateriness there. Now, the delay device does have built-in modulation here. It's kind of limited though. You could also use the Echo device, which also has built-in modulation, which is actually a little bit better because you have these different waveforms and more options. But the best thing I've found is just to use an external LFO because you have even more options that way. And in particular, there's this third-party Max for Live LFO called LFO-I, which is like the best one I've found, which is basically like the normal Max for Live LFO, except it has just like super buffed up randomness options built into it. So if we click on random here and then click this little circle, we get a bunch of different randomness options. So we get linear, cosine, cubic, spline, hermit, and these are all just different types of randomness. So linear is just like a line moving at different angles, right? And we could modulate the delay time and with those sort of movements. Obviously, you could do this same sort of thing with automation as well, just like draw in a bunch of random automation. If you're in a DAW that doesn't have very good modulation capabilities. So if we go to cosine, changes from like straight lines to smooth lines, so more of like a sine wave kind of thing. Cubic, it's like a kind of bouncy line. It's just pretty interesting. Spline. Don't even know how to describe that. It's like a mix between the straight line and the cosine one, and then hermit. Don't know how to describe this. It's just like pretty much totally random. Maybe we'll use this one. So if I map this now to the time value on our delay, and then I'll play a note, yeah, and just loop it a bunch. And we can still hear the rhythm of our note that we're playing, which isn't ideal because like real water doesn't have a proper rhythm usually, right? So we'll just bring the dry wet all the way up on the delay. We'll get rid of that. Now we're only hearing the delay portion. And we can tweak the depth a little bit so it's not going to such extreme values. That's pretty cool. And the super ultra mega cool part of this is when you just highlight them both and then duplicate them out. Now we're delaying the delay and it gets even more watery. We can change the rate of the second LFO maybe slightly faster. I mean, they're both totally random, so I don't know what real difference that's going to make, but hopefully a little bit. We could copy it over again. Yeah, now we're getting some sort of noise introduced into it. Bring the dip down a little bit more. Pick the offset up slightly. And we'll duplicate it one more time. And I'm just going to fold all these other ones down here. Wow, that's sounding pretty cool. Now on this last one, we could enable ping pong mode, so we'll just get some insane stereo width happening. Whoa! Whoa! You get really cool sort of effects. It's already sounding like some crazy kind of like water spell cast or something. Obviously you could just stop there if you want, it's already sounding pretty neat. But one of the really cool devices I've found for making watery textures is a vocoder. Now, Ableton Live's vocoder is, for some reason, it's like really good at making things sound watery. Other vocoders, you can still get the water kind of sound, but there's certain features in Live's vocoder and the way it works. For some reason, it really lends itself to making these kind of sounds. So if you don't know what a vocoder is, really quick explanation, I guess. Basically what it does is, traditionally, for that like traditional vocoder sound, I guess, like the Daft Punk synthy voice that I'm sure all of you have heard before, all it's doing is basically splitting one sound into a bunch of different band passes and then taking a second separate sound and then using that sound to control the level of each of the band passes. So in this example, we have like some water, and then I could make another track with maybe like a drum beat on it or something like that, then click external as our carrier, like this, and then select the track as the drum beat here, and then we'll be using the drum beat to determine the amplitude of each of the band passes, if that makes sense. So you get this kind of like morphed kind of sound. You get a sound that's got the frequency characteristics of one sound but the sort of amplitude characteristics of another sound. For this, I'm not interested in morphing our water with any other kind of different sound. I more just want to shape our water sound we already have with the vocoder. The way I do that is I click this modulator mode, and that is basically just going to use our input signal as both carrier and modulator signals. So it's going to split our water sound into a bunch of different band passes, and then it's also going to use the same sound to determine the amplitude of those band passes. And as you can hear, if I just do that, so it's on modulator mode and I've increased the range to max, it's basically just going to sound pretty much the same. Maybe just slightly dulled out because of the way band passes work. If I click enhance, it might be even closer here. Pretty much the same sound, except the benefit of feeding it through the vocoder now is we can go ahead and shape it into something completely new now, because we have access to all these individual band passes, and we can control how the signals fed into those band passes and what happens afterwards and all that kind of stuff, and how many band passes there are, what frequency range the band passes are at, how wide the band passes actually are, and so on. So let's just keep this on loop and then just have a play around with the vocoder, and I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So I might go all the way up to 40 bands. That's sounding pretty sweet. So as I said before, you can change the range option. So if we bring the bottom value up, so from 20 hertz up to like 800 hertz, you can hear that this lowest band has been moved up. So the lowest frequency we're hearing is now 800 hertz. It's kind of like a high pass filter in a way. Except it's 40 different band passes all moving up. And we can do the same with the high value. So this is more like a low pass filter. And we have a band width. So this is basically just like the width of the band passes. If we go all the way down to 0, it's going to sound like a bunch of different sine waves that are all like totally inharmonic. In a way, it is kind of harmonic though. They're all kind of laid out evenly. Harmonics that are evenly spaced apart make a tritone kind of sound, and it kind of sounds diminished. It's really interesting. Then we also have this gate option. So that's basically just a threshold on a gate for the signal before it gets fed through the band passes. So if I bring this up, we're only going to get little quick spurts of little water sounds. Which is pretty interesting. Then we also have the depth. This is also the same sort of thing. It's kind of the same. It's kind of like a threshold on a gate in a way, but it's more like how much of the signal we're feeding through into the band passes. Basically, the gate works with the carrier signal, I think, and then the depth works on the modulator signal. But since we're using modulator mode, it's both the same signal, it's just different stages in the signal. So if we bring the depth all the way back, we're basically boosting the volume of the signal before it gets fed through the bandpasses, I think. And then we can do the opposite. So it's kind of similar to the gate. It's just a bit more watery. Interesting. We also have this attack and release. That's basically how quickly the bandpass amplitudes are reacting to changes in amplitude. So if we bring the release all the way down, it's kind of reacting quite fast, right? But if we bring it all the way up, it's going to almost sound like a reverb, almost like a really shitty reverb. And we do the same with the attack, right? It's just going to smooth out the sound a bit. And then we have this formant option. So this is basically just shifting all of the bands backwards and forwards in the frequency spectrum. So for example, if we make this range kind of narrow, so from 1000 hertz to like 8000 hertz, and then I actually put a limiter on the end as well, so you can actually hear what's going on a bit better. Bring the step down. Now if I move this formant, you're just going to hear all of the bands move forward and back. It's kind of like a band pass. It's like a master band pass. It is the band passes of band passes. I'm just going to tweak this sound until I like the sound of what I'm hearing. The other cool thing, if you hear like harsh resonances that you're not a fan of that are happening too often, you can kind of carve them out with the bandpass visualization here. So get rid of those high, like those low-pitched resonances there. We can do the same with the high end too. Like really flatten out the spectrum. Leave it like this. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to that. And something really cool is you can just like duplicate the delay again at the end. And you get really interesting sounds. Other cool options for making things sound super watery, pitch shifter. So this new shifter device in Ableton 11.1 is when they released it, I think, has built-in modulation. So you can go to like frequency mode, turn the modulation amount up. And you get really cool little artifacts like that. You can shape the modulation to turn the rate all the way up. You could do pitch shifting instead. Sounds kind of like a robot, like a water robot. It's pretty cool. Another device that's cool is a phaser. You can do a similar thing. You bring up the notches. Yeah. You could also bring the rate all the way up too. Experiment with that. It gets kind of bubbly. So yeah, obviously there's a million different ways you could process it. Just get creative, I guess. But that's the general idea. Now why don't we try use operator, but like very minimal effects. Like let's keep the effects to a minimum and try get a watery texture just only using operator. So we've got an initialized patch here. So we could probably like start with a sine wave and just try to randomize the heck out of it. But maybe we should attack it from the other direction. Maybe we should start with something with lots of harmonics and then try like carve them away and then randomize that somehow. So why don't we start with the saw wave, low pitched one. Now if I put a oscilloscope at the end, excuse me, oops, you can see, yeah, we can kind of see there, well that's glitching out a little bit, it's basically a saw wave. I can confirm that is a saw wave, but now if we put a filter on this, boost the resonance up, start moving it around, whoa. We get lots of little sine waves, don't we? Maybe we can exploit that. So maybe if I use a bandpass instead. That is basically just sine waves. All sounds are made of sine waves, so you can kind of just exploit that fact. And isolate them here. Now let's try to randomize this filter. So if I enable the LFO, put it on sample and hold. So it's basically just a randomized filter that jumps between values, and disable those ones, and then on destination B we'll select filter frequency. Now we're getting a bunch of different sine wave pitches. Let's turn the amount up here. We're getting somewhere. Let's hone in on a pitch for our saw wave that sounds the best. So you can hear on these higher pitches it all kind of still sounds like harmonically related, which probably isn't ideal. Sounds kind of like a robot or something. Now it just sounds like a bunch of different bloops. Because we've turned the frequency all the way down to 10 Hz, which is like below audio rate. But we could even randomize the pitch of the saw wave if we really wanted to. Enough of this oscilloscope, get the idea. Now let's try use that shifter again. A random sample on hold, bring the width up. Maybe we could actually bring the spread up on the operator too, that might sound cool. Could even transpose. That's pretty neat. Let's randomize the transpose value. We'll use LFOI. Now we could use our delay trick again. Maybe I'll just use echo, the built-in modulation for the sake of simplicity, and I'll only use one delay instead of like 20. And I'll offset these slightly, so just so we get some stereo width. And go to modulation, turn the delay modulation up. And get some really interesting watery textures. And why don't we put the shifter after the delay? also add a vocoder again. Now, this noise mode is actually really cool. Basically, like I was saying before, vocoders use 2 different signals, right? But the noise mode just uses a noise oscillator for our second signal. So you're just making your signal a bit noisier, basically. Bring the dry wet down a bit. And then maybe we'll combine it with modulator mode here. Yeah, nice and bubbly. One thing that can be cool is putting a spring reverb at the end, because for some reason spring reverbs just already have this weird kind of watery texture to them. It's like because of the spring nature of them, like certain frequencies get dispersed or something weird. I don't know what happens, but springs just work. Just makes it watery. You could also use disperser obviously as well. It's another cool device. So that's one way of going about it. I guess that wraps up this video. I don't want them to get too insanely long. But there will be a part 2, possibly a part 3. In part 2, I'll probably experiment with Serum or maybe even Vital or something like that. I'll go into some ways you can actually use this to make practical kind of sounds, maybe like a hi-hat loop or something like that, or a drum beat, or how to fuse these into your melodic or rhythmical aspects of your music. And there is actually one more really, really amazing thing you can do with Vocoder, but I'm going to leave it till last, so you guys have to watch every single one of my videos. Trust me, it's really, really cool. Massive, massive shout out to all my amazing Patreon supporters. You guys make creating these videos worthwhile, so thank you very, very much. If you're interested in my Patreon, I upload exclusive tutorials and sample packs and heaps of different stuff up there, so definitely have a look if you've got a spare few dollars a month. The next sample pack up on Patreon is going to be all water themed, so it's got all these crazy watery effects. Drum beats. But for now, thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.